Mojaba, Ibae. We pay homage to all of our spiritual ancestors, predecessors, since time immemorial. We thank you. We thank you for all of your saving, your love, your DNA. We pay homage that we too may one day walk in your footsteps in this very lifetime. I wish.
That's true.
Gurus Mojaba, Ibae. We pay homage to all of the gurus, to all of the saints, sages, mystics, adepts, since time immemorial. We thank you. We honor you, that we too may one day walk in your footsteps, that we may realize our true selves, our true nature, our true condition in this very lifetime. I wish. Sangha Mojaba, Ibae. We pay homage to all of the spiritual communities, Sanghats, who have preserved the Dharma, who have rendered Savior on behalf of the Dharma giver. We honor you. We pay homage to you, that we too may be an example in this very lifetime. I thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. Welcome to Malcolm X College. Welcome to the new Karnak, Malcolm X College. Karnak is the Wellness Institute, and we're going to make everyone well because we're going to change the conditions, we're going to change the temperature, we're going to change the attitude of all of us inside of Karnak, and we're going to work ourselves out to the community. Because when we leave here, we go into the community, right? And we go into the stores and the churches and the food stores, and we encounter other people. And they're going to see these people with these shines on their faces and this attitude that is just so positive and so powerful in terms of how we encountered them, what we said to them. And they're going to wonder, who is that person? Who is that person? I see all the friendly faces. You all have been coming consistent now. It's almost like church. The real true believers. The true believers. And this is so influencing to me and to the speakers who have come, and all of you, because that's the reason you're coming back. You're seeing and hearing something that connects with you, your heart, your mind, your spirit. in a direction that we can all go in the same direction. And all we need is a critical mass. We don't need everybody. We don't need everybody, and we don't want everybody thinking exactly alike, right? But there's some theme that should run through all of us, and that's what's connecting us. There's a theme, there's a thread that's connecting all of us. And so on those critical things that move people in life, that's what's connecting all of us. We have that same road that we want to go down together. And this is a great thing. We've had several speakers now, and I don't see how you all survived Dr. Ingram last week. Because, you know, I went home and I was so positive, and then Sunday I got mad, Doc. And I thought there was something wrong with me. I said, how could I listen to that man and get mad on Sunday? But you know what? That brought it to my conscience what I was doing. And I immediately changed. Immediately, I got mad and I immediately changed. That's not proper. That's not appropriate. So it worked. That seminar worked. Now this one I really need. Because I've always wondered, how is it someone else that is a cause for your happiness, or is it you? Who determines whether I'm happy or not? Is it outside? Someone else, my wife, my kids, my colleagues who I work with? Who is the determinant for my happiness? The gentleman who's going to speak to us today on this subject is Professor Hunter A.Adams. I mean, whew. We started Karnak, Dr. Ingram's vision, sold me on his vision. I realized that it was something there that connected us and that our vision was the same. And the first name that he called out was Hunter. That was the first name that he called out that needs to be a part of this. Hunter's lectured all over the world. He's traveled all over the world. He's lectured to mathematicians, conferences on neuroscience. I mean, he's a true Renaissance man. So I don't know how powerful his lecture is going to be today. I don't even know if we're going to be able to understand it. Probably the only one that can understand it is Dr. Ingram. So we'll probably have to get some cliff notes from Dr. Ingram later to explain this conversation that's about to happen. But are you ready?
Yes.
For our Karnak series?
Yes.
This one's going to be rough. You have some notes. You see, you got a PowerPoint. You had to get a PowerPoint to help break it down. The science of happiness. Do you believe it?
Wow.
How is it a science? We have questions and answers afterwards. So I don't know how long we're going to be here tonight, but I know you're ready. You ready? Let's hear this presentation. Let's welcome the expert, the scientist. Come on up.
Thank you so very much for that extremely generous introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here today to share a few things about MAATI and happiness and our current condition. And I hope that you have questions. I'm sure you probably will. And I just ask you if you would save the long commentary, because a lot of folks like to get up and speak and talk extemporaneously and bring up things that may have happened years ago and try to connect them here in the present. So I just ask if you can save that for the end. I mean, I don't mind it, but just save it for the end, because I may not be able to get through everything, but I will try, because I do have a lot I want to share with you today. And I really appreciate everyone for coming, and I'm very appreciative to President Brooks for launching this whole idea of a Karnak Wellness Institute. So let's give President Brooks an applause. I want to start with a short quote from one of the oldest books in the world, the teachings of Ptah from ancient Kemet, or some may know it as ancient Egypt. And this is Maxim 41, epilogue number 4, on the ignorant man or woman. Nothing will work out in favor of an ignorant man who does not listen, and he or she will achieve nothing. To him or her, knowledge is the same as ignorance, usefulness the same as damage, and everything he does or she does is loathsome, so that his attitude constantly works against him. He or she lives on a diet of twisted, criminal, malevolent arguments. That is a trait in the dignitaries recognized in him, one of the living dead going about his or her daily business. People steer clear of his or her baleful deeds on account of the countless misfortunes that daily overwhelm him or her. The teachings of Ptah. Now, some of you may have asked, you see my first slide up here, the MAATI code, the science of happiness, and you see this image in the background, a double helix. But this is an extremely special double helix, taken with the Hubble Space Telescope of a galaxy in the shape of a double helix. So does that give you any idea or higher appreciation for the life that's within us? Our own DNA is representative of a cosmic blueprint. I want to keep that kind of perspective here, because so many of us, given everything that's happening, forget about that. So I start off in dedication of this lecture to one of my heroes and mentors and colleagues and teachers, Dr. Asa Hilliard. And I also would add Dr. Jacob Carruthers, because those two men were fearful in the struggle for the validation of the consciousness of African people, the philosophy of African people. They waged an incessant battle for that, and I do appreciate both of them. So 3 purposes of this presentation. 1, what is happiness? We have to raise the question, what exactly is happiness? And then we have social happiness, or well-being, and the two are connected. And so what I'm going to do in looking at number 2 up there, social happiness, is do a case study of the MAATI code in ancient Kemet, or Egypt, and its precursors. I won't have a lot of time to go backwards because we have a short amount of time today. Then I'm going to take a look at the Declarations of Independence ideal versus the transatlantic human trafficking experience. I don't use the word slave trade because we were never slaves, we were captives. Slaves are in Eastern Europe, the Slavs, so we have to be clear on that. Then the last thing we'll look at is personal and social happiness. The MAATI code reloaded in the 21st century. So 10 questions we will consider. Many of you may not heard of what MAAT is or was. So there's a number of questions that I want you to keep in the back of your minds as we go through this. The first one is, why do I need to know about MAAT? The second, what is the MAATI code? Where did MAAT come from? How did it develop over time and decay? What was MAAT symbolized by? What are the 42 principles of MAAT, or the Declarations of Innocence? How is MAAT different from other overarching social matrices? Is MAAT ethnocentric or culturally universal? Does MAAT complement, compete, or conflict with any faith or the law? Why am I just learning about MAAT? And lastly, how can learning about MAAT benefit me, my family, and my community? Why is this important? Obviously, it must be important because all of you are here. And I appreciate that, because you must have gleaned something of this or heard something about MAATI over the course of your studies. And so we're going to go a little bit deeper into that today. So I want to start off with the idea that the world is not flat, contrary to Thomas Friedman of the New York Times in his best-selling book. The world is a social field where the human story unfolds and grows and develops. And we're all part of that human story. We have to establish the context of ourselves within this larger field of human experience. Now let's get started. The backstory to happiness is belief. Is belief. That's the backstory to happiness. What we believe is true often is more important or more relevant than what is actually true. Money is the root of all evil. Chicken soup is good for the soul. Heaven is beyond the sky. Columbus discovered America. Women do poorly at mathematics. Black people are extremely emotional. So why start my presentation with this peculiar assertion? For one thing, it tells us something about how our brains work. It also compels us to ask, where did I first learn those propositions? They just didn't pop out of the sky. And last, it forces us to differentiate mindset, or some may call positive thinking, from mind sense, a sense of mind. And that's something much broader, much deeper than simply mindset. So let's look at two kinds of beliefs. There's liberating beliefs, beliefs that free you from constraints, beliefs that allow you to separate truth from falsehood, beliefs that enable courage, beliefs that empowers you to take action. Then there's limiting beliefs, beliefs that constrain, beliefs which enable fears, beliefs that become dogmatic and paralyze growth. How is happiness and unhappiness becomes enlivened? How does it live? And there's a cycle to it. I want you to think about this. Think about belief and how your beliefs construct your social reality to a large measure. And from your reality, of your understanding of reality, you make decisions. Often those decisions are good decisions, but sometimes those decisions may be poor decisions. But the end result is results. And that may be happiness, it may be unhappiness. So there's a whole notion here of responsibility, that in a large measure, we do have input or can direct how we respond to the reality that we construct. Or maybe you want to do something different. Maybe the reality that we have come to accept and know isn't reality at all. Maybe it's something else, something entirely different. So key questions for considerations on happiness. Are you pursuing happiness? How do you define happiness? Is salvation the same as happiness? Is happiness found in success? How long does happiness last? Why does it end? Is happiness found when you're not looking for it? And can you create conditions to be happier? Is that possible? Ask yourself, is it possible to create conditions within my life, within all my relations, where I can manifest a greater sense of happiness and well-being, despite the outer contexts? Because happiness we have to take in context with our social, psychological world. We just can't divorce ourselves from the world that we're living in, because we're part of that. We're part of a larger cultural context. And that larger cultural context may support our quest for happiness, or it may deny our quest for happiness. We have to consider that. And if so, then we have to ask, well, then what can we do? Are we totally helpless? Do we have to just go along to get along? and be miserable all our lives? Or can we take action and actually do something? And that's where we get into interpersonal, intrapersonal, social groups, organizations. This is the larger context because we're involved in all of these different aspects of being. We're not simply alone by ourselves, but we exist in this larger context. But we have to contend with the harsh realities that hamper our capacity to create conditions for happiness. And these are very real, right? They're very real. We got wars, we got global climate change, oil addiction, drug abuse, human trafficking, arms dealing, homelessness, glaring wealth disparities, racism, sexism, classism, incarceration as after effects, joblessness, obsessive consumerism, ethnocide, and so forth. So all of these factors hamper our capacity to create conditions for our own happiness. So is it still possible to do that despite this? That's the question. But we have to consider that we're being infected with a lot of viruses, information viruses, in fact, the new science of the meme. And so a lot of us are stressed out, harsh realities, foreclosures, unemployment lines, businesses failing. I'm not going to go into the stats because I think we're familiar with the comparisons of joblessness among high school dropouts, 22 to 30, 72%. So that says if someone drops out of high school, what are the possibilities of them finding a job or creating a livable job, not one on the streets being a pharmaceutical salesperson or representative, right? Because those aren't fulfilling jobs. They end up leading to jail or death, and ultimately unhappiness, because you can't contend with that. You know, it's not stable, so you're constantly in a flux, and so you'll never experience any happiness. It'll only be fleeting. So we have stress. People are just busting out, doing all kinds of insane things. We see it every day, something new. Man flies his plane, steals a plane, and flies into the IRS building. You know, someone upset goes to the Smithsonian and shoots and kills people. Someone else upset doesn't like abortion and decides to kill a physician who's performing abortions on women who had no choice. So there's a lot of things that's taking place. So unhappiness. And these are emotions that are a result of unhappiness. Some of them, there's many more, but disappointment, rejection. How many folks have been rejected? Raise your hand. That there was someone you loved, you liked this person, but then they rejected you and said, I don't want you. Or a job. You've been rejected or fired from a job. Betrayal. How many have been betrayed by somebody, some situation? Mostly everyone. These are common emotions. But the question is, given the betrayal, how long did it take for you to bounce back? Did you have within yourself a well of resilience that you could bounce back from that betrayal? Bounce back from someone committing revenge on you, or bounce back from loss. The most difficult loss to bounce back from is the death of someone close to us, because that person is a part of us, is part of our whole chemistry, our brain chemistry. And so when they're gone, when their presence is gone, there's a space, there's a gap within ourselves. And that's difficult to overcome, that sense of loss. But it is possible. It just takes time. Wouldn't you like to know how to do that faster, rather than going through 6, 10 years of grieving, wearing yourself down, feeling sad and depressed, taking Prozac, Proloft, or other medications, being drugged up, or drinking, or smoking marijuana, the great anti-motivational drug, which a lot of older black people today, 50, 60, 70 years old, are still using. They haven't left it behind. You know, wouldn't you like to be able to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Most people would. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about that. So there's a cycle to unhappiness. First, you're coping with some event that happened to you. Then that leads to stress. Then that creates unhappiness. Then you try to cope with your unhappiness. And it leads to more stress. And then it leads to deeper unhappiness. And then it leads to greater coping. You just go around and around and around. Don't you want to get off that wheel? You know, and walk straight? Wouldn't you like to do that?
Yes.
Right. Well, you got to recognize, the first thing you got to recognize the situation that you're in. You got to be honest with yourself, brutally honest with yourself. And that's hard for us to do when we live in a culture, society of lies, of falsehood. How many people are honest in the public square? Politicians, entertainers, you know, the quick excuses, I apologize for this or that, and they really didn't mean it. But fortunately, and this is important, as Dr. King said, history does not pose problems without eventually producing solutions. The disenchanted, the disadvantaged, and the disinherited seem at times of deep crisis to summon up sort of genius that enables them to perceive and capture the appropriate weapons to carve out their destiny. So there's examples from history. We don't hear this quote too much, do we? Right? There's examples from history that we can look at. There's examples from Africana history that so many of us, not maybe in this room, give the short shrift to, because we've been told that there's nothing that comes out of Africa of value. But let's go into The African Unconscious by Edward Bruce Bynum. 100,000 years of human consciousness evolution. That's amazing. 100,000 years of human conscious, spiritual evolution. Where's the evidence? Well, there's art all over Africa. There's a book by this sister here, Dr. Alondra Oubre, a medical anthropologist at University of California, Berkeley, who wrote an incredible book, it's hard to find, called Instinct and Revelation, that looks at 100,000 years of human, social, spiritual, and conscious development. And all over Africa, there's rock art. Some of the art goes back, has been dated to 70,000 years in South Africa. 70,000 years of evidence, of proof that our ancestors were thinking about the same types of things that we're thinking about today. That were faced with the same types of challenges that we're faced today, of how to be happy. How to be happy. On another lecture, you know, I can show you a lot of images of rock art from the continent, because you need to see those. But today, we really don't have the time for that. But I will show you some things. The evolution of my art and astronomical evidence. In 1984, the first shuttle mission, the Space Shuttle Challenger mission 41G, they had an instrument known as the Shuttle Imaging Radar, SIRB. This was October the 5th through the 13th, 1984. And they flew over the Sahara Desert. And as they flew over the Sahara Desert, they were taking images of the desert. They were bouncing radar from the shuttle down to the surface. And it penetrated the surface. Okay, it penetrated the surface. When they got back and analyzed the data, what they found was that there were remnants of underground rivers and cities and villages underneath the sands of the Sahara. That's profound. But many of the top archaeologists, such as Fred Wendorf, had problems with that. He just couldn't accept that there were villages, there were cities underneath the sands of the Sahara. And so he decided to prove the images wrong. And he went. He had an expedition and others had expeditions. And lo and behold, they discovered that that was true. There were rivers and cities underneath the sands of the Sahara. And this is where Kemetic society was born. And people migrated to the Nile Valley. And here's some rock art. Kemet, or ancient Egypt's oldest rock art, 15,000 years old. 15,000 years old. And this was at a time when the Sahara was not a desert. It didn't start to become a desert until around 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. So 15,000 years and before, it was grassland. It was lush. A very different type of social environment. I bring this up because astronomy was very important. And there's astronomical observatories in Napta and other places in ancient Egypt, dating back 6,000 years, these two stone pillars here. And they had a different view of constellations in the sky. The constellations of the giraffes, which was really the belt of Orion here. The constellation of two women doing each other's hair. Isn't that something? That they saw in the sky a configuration of two women doing each other's hair. Now that's really amazing. And these two figures here, these two dancing women here, I had some other images, but I don't have them today. And so what they did, from this sense of understanding the cosmos, they saw themselves as being part of the sky. There was no separation. Today we see the sky is out there, or the sky is someplace you go when you die, heaven, maybe. But we don't see the sky as part of our consciousness. And so we're missing something by not seeing that. And so the Milky Way galaxy, they in turn made that into the image of a woman who gives birth to everything, known as Nut, or also pronounced Noe. And so that followed the tracking of the sun here, the Milky Way galaxy. You can kind of see the similarities here between the two images. Can you see that? Now some will argue that the Nephilim, or some visitors from another planet and so forth, constructed the temples and pyramids in ancient Egypt. You've heard that before, haven't you? Right. Some people really believe that. But it goes counter to the data. The data suggests, from Frederick Curzon of University of Washington, he made a map of the social organization of Kemet in the pre-dynastic time period. And you see all these things connected, from floodplain ecology to cereal cultivation, calendars, mathematics, economic differentiation, administration, because you had to administer all these things. We tend not to think about the process of governing in Kemet. We'll see finds of a new mummy just recently, or trying to understand what killed or who killed King Tutankhamun. But the actual structure, how was this society governed, what was it based on, no one talks about. And that's the most important thing. It's not how the pyramids were built, for example, but why. The why question. And so they left artwork all over the desert showing people what their society was like, how they lived, how they fished, how they fought each other, and so forth. But the most important thing They had a sense of rhythm because they understood that was at the heart of the natural world and the universe. From the small, the seemingly small, an insect, the Scarabeus beetle, to the cosmos itself. They saw the connection between all of that and themselves. So in Hotep, they looked at natural forms. These were natural forms in the Western Desert, which gave the architect in Hotep the idea for a step pyramid. A natural form. What does that look like? Right? So they were modeling structures off of nature. Everything was in that larger context. So there was a sacredness to all the things that they did. In fact, you know, when they say you can't make the word God, for example, into Kemet, because for them it was nature. And everything for them was divine. Everything. And that's an important distinction. So balance was key. So we come to the MAATI code. Why do I call it a code? Because that's the closest that we can come to describing it, because there were so many ways to describe MAAT. Here symbolized by a woman with a feather, ostrich feather, in her hair, and an ankh. We'll come back to that. So Zep Tepi, the first occasion when MAAT as a civilization, governing a civilization, came into being. Because it was existing, it came into existence when existence came into existence. That's a little philosophical. But the point is that before, when existence, everything that exists came into existence, MAAT was co-present with that. And it was up to the king and society to protect it, to continually renew it through their activities and actions over time. So some have argued, well, is MAAT a philosophy, a religion, a social theory, an economic system, a moral ideal, political theory, cosmology, ethical system, way of life, educational theory, metaphysics, environmental praxis? The point here is that you can't reduce it down to any of these terms, because the people at that time didn't have these terms. And we have to, that's an important point, that it's all of these things, but it's something more than all of this. So it's fundamentally untranslatable into any Western language. But many African languages have similar ideas. Iwa Pele among the Yoruba, for example. So the MAATI code, Kemet's overarching ideal. When we start to look at it, it was written as this. The first syllable here, the word Ma, means to see reality as it is, to see the forest and the trees simultaneously. But we have to ask the question, how did where did the feather come in? An ostrich feather at that. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it about an ostrich that it was chosen to be a symbol of MAAT? What is it about an ostrich? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Yes.
When they get scared or get under stress, they put their head underground and they don't want to see the inevitable or what's happening.
Oh, that's a pretty standard explanation, but that's not the right one. Anyone else? I don't want to embarrass anyone here. All these brilliant people here. Come on now. It's right in front of your face. What's that? I can't hear you.
They run fast.
Yes, but there's something else. I've given you a clue here to see reality as it is. So how do they see?
Very well.
Very well, but how?
Because they have a long neck.
They have a long neck, which allows them to do what?
To see over everything.
To see distances.
to see all the way around, 360 degrees, right? The whole sphere of seeing. And it's very important to know that, because that became a dividing point in Kemetic society. You had a group of people who were the sphere people, and you had the pyramid people. And I'm talking about social organization here. The pyramid, of course, you know, you have this wide bottom and you have the pinnacle. And there's few people at the top. In that case, the king. And so they want to keep perpetuating that way of social organization, with a few people control it. But the sphere people who saw things in that spherical way, they wanted to share everything. And so there was this competition throughout Kemetic society, which most people don't even look at, between those two ways of seeing and being and governing, which Akwi Armah talks about in his book, Kemet in the House of Life. Even though this is a novel, it's based on real deep research, but it's hard to find, but it's an outstanding book. So here, within the circle of meaning of Ma'at, everything was connected. But there was a fluidity, there was a spaciousness about the connections between meaning, ethics, society, governance, family, person, even science and technology, and medicine. Perant, the House of Life. From the Memphite theology, a short text talks about how things coming into being. There comes into being in the heart, tongue, as an image, atun, to be, very great, patah, give life to the natures, all, their cause, all of it. One of the key things here that they say is image. And that's very, very important, of having an understanding that we're dealing at that time with images, images of the divine, images of everything inside of us. And we're going to talk about images a little later on and the importance of them. One of the most important functions of the king, even of the Netchers, was the offering of Ma'at to Ma'at. The offering of Ma'at. Here you see the Netcher Ray offering Ma'at to Ma'at. Akhenaten of the 18th dynasty offering Ma'at. Seti the first offering Ma'at. Even Jehuti, the symbol for wisdom, making an offering to Ma'at. So this is very, very significant when we look at how the society was structured. That, can you imagine a president offering the highest good, the highest possibility of happiness to everyone? That's what this is about. That's the equivalent. You know, one of the reasons why I studied neuroscience, I have to show, this is very important, is because the study of the brain began in Kemet. Over at the Oriental Institute, you can see the Edwin C. Smith Papyrus. And in it is the first word for brain in any language, in any culture. So when I studied neuroscience, the textbook that we used was by Nobel laureate Eric Kandel and James Swartz. And we see right here the Kemetic word for brain. A-I-S, AIS, that's the transliteration. And here is a drawing of different Kemetic or ancient Egyptian terms for different parts of the brain, the skull, and so forth. From around 1400 BC. Imagine that. that there was serious study of how our brains work, how our minds work. President Brooks, done by African people in the Nile Valley at that time, that was recognized by Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientists on the cover of the textbook. When you flip the word around, ius, you get sia, which meant mind. So there was no dichotomy between mind and brain, or mind, brain, and spirit. There was a unity there as they understood. They saw that personhood was multidimensional, which we are discovering today via neuroscience and other sciences. And we won't have time to look at the Aku, or spirit, or Sahu, or spiritual body, Sekhem, life force, the Kat, physical body, our heart, the Ba, the Ka, the Rin, the name. All of these things for the people of Kemet constituted their personality. So much so that when you heard their type of music, it would be like whirling dervishes, where you're just transformed and you should start dancing, hearing that type of music. And I do have some with me today. If I get a chance, I can play some later after we finish, just to give you a little sample of how someone has reconstructed Kemetic music. Because in many cases, it's still being played. Now, one thing about Akhenaten, 18th dynasty, Pharaoh Akhenaten, and Queen Nefertiti, seen here, is that they developed an inner light-based theology. Not simply from the sun, but light from within. Light from within. And now we have the evidence of that today being done by scientists from all over the world. But something happened. It's hard to sustain such a society over thousands of years. And there are many periods, a number of significant periods, where there were invasions, there was famine, there were droughts, there were wars, there were internal conflicts. And so to depict that, they have this scene here of people walking upside down, consuming their own urine and feces. You got that? That was to give a visual representation of what it was like at those time periods. And this was also the beginning when there was, as Jacob Carruthers talks about, intellectual warfare. When other people start coming into Kemet, the Persians, the Greeks, there was a clash of the titans, so to speak, a clash of ideologies, a clash of worldviews. And we've been fighting this clash ever since. It's still going on today. And things have gone dark in a way. But there was others that went down into Egypt. This image here from the catacombs at the Vatican. Jesus and his disciples. This is a rare image. But you look at how he's being depicted. Is he depicted as Michelangelo depicted him? What does he look like? Yes. In accordance with the way texts say, scriptures say. But unfortunately, most of us never see these images. But the point I'm making here is that there's a continuation of the idea of what MAATI represented into Christianity. That's the point here. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So why is peace so difficult to achieve and sustain? With all these various religious systems, many of them have their ways and principles for achieving happiness, but they don't seem to be working very well today, do they? Do we see evidence of them? No, because this is a different kind of environment from 3,000, 2,000, 1,000, 500, 100, or yesterday. The environment is very different now. So we have 4 happiness questions. Are we maintaining an optimistic or positive attitude even during crisis or conflict, such as the time period we're living in today? We have to ask ourselves, are we regularly kind to others? Are we identifying and achieving meaningful, realistic personal goals? Do we engage any physical activity or exercise? How often are we helping people? How often are we trying to generate goodness for ourselves and others? How often are we trying to serve others, to serve our communities? As I said earlier, where is happiness located? I talked about the larger context for happiness. And we have to keep that in mind, that there's this larger social context. We're just not here as individuals. Interestingly, some happiness thoughts, and I only have one that I'll share with you today, but I think it's very significant. We've all had civics classes, haven't we? Haven't we?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe a lot of the youth today are getting civics. And if Texas has its way, they're going to flip the script on how we learn civics and what's important in the history of this country. But Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence in 1776 that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, from Thomas Jefferson. So he acknowledges the significance and importance of happiness, but what's wrong with this? There's something wrong with this picture here, right? First off, it says all men are created equal. Women are left out. That's important. And he talks about inalienable rights, that they are rights, that you have a right to be happy. No, not to be happy, to pursue happiness. You don't have a right to be happy, as he understood it for men, but it's the pursuit of happiness. And the distinction is important because, and here's the big problem, for captive African people in the United States at that time, and maybe even continually today, the pursuit of happiness as public policy was one of denial. Being denied the opportunity to achieve their goals, denied the ability to survive on their own terms, denied the right to survive at all, except under the most debasing and denigrating conditions. Now that's the context, right, at 1776. But we're kind of still in the same context today. That there's an effort to constantly deny our capacity to pursue happiness. So you got to go underground, you got to be covert in your efforts to pursue happiness. Because if you rise up to the surface, you're going to meet with opposition. Am I right?
That's right.
Okay, I just want to see if y'all here now. Awful quiet. So we have disaster capitalism. So how can you pursue happiness under African ethnocide? How can you do that at that time period? So this was a time of immense cultural trauma. So the opportunity to pursue happiness, to live your life as you would want to, was extremely difficult in those circumstances. Even the period of, quote, neo-slavery or Jim Crow. So Dr. Asa Hilliard talked about 12 challenges of African people, that we do not have an adequate African-centered wisdom tradition. Definitions, assumptions, priorities, and above all, world views must reflect us. What we have are fragments of MAATI. Because when we came here, we did come with elements of MAATI, but just fragments of it. Not a complete package, not a whole system, working system, just fragments. So we've lost our solidarity. We've lost the capacity of having this grand idea or social theory, as Dr. Bobby Wright would talk about, that would keep us together and the institution to support it. So under the whole notion of happiness as public policy, the astronomer and mathematician, writer, Benjamin Banneker, or Banneker, connected to the Dogon of West Africa. That's where he inherited the whole notion of astronomy and all the amazing things that he did, from calculating the movements of stars himself, which some say Benjamin Franklin plagiarized. Banneker would publish his almanacs, and then somehow his calculation would pop up in Benjamin Franklin's document. At least that's what some people say. But the point here is that Benjamin Banneker and Benjamin Rush, a medical doctor who signed the Declaration of Independence, co-authored a plan of a peace office for the United States. And this is contained in his 1793 almanac. Now this is really significant. One of the statements in this plan for a Department of Peace is, let a power be given to the Secretary of Peace to establish and maintain free schools in every city, village, and township in the United States. Let the youth of our country be instructed in reading, writing, and arithmetic, and in the doctrines of a religion of some kind. He does later specify or give privilege to Christianity, but the point was a religion of some kind, to teach us not only to cultivate peace with all men, but to forgive, nay more, to love our very enemies. Benjamin Banneker, 1793. And we still don't have a Department of Peace. Right? So African ethnocide, the struggle continues. We have a president of the United States from Chicago. At least he moved to Chicago. Right. But we have to contend with horrific opposition to his presence there in the White House. This was just April the 15th. And we see someone with a mask, with a white coat on like a doctor, with a bird face representing him. We have this, an email. This is the actual email from the Republican candidate for governor from the state of New York. And we see the president as what?
Yeah.
And the first lady as what? I won't say it. But this was sent out on an email broadcast. Now the other images I will not show you. If you ask me where did I get this from, see me afterwards. But I don't even want to share it because they're so grotesque and offensive. No matter what you may think about his policies, This is uncalled for, but this is talking about something really deeper. Really deeper, right? He's a visitor from another planet, from the series V, right? They vote to suck your blood. And this was from the paper, Los Angeles City Beat. But it's worse. The New Southern Strategy. The chimp. Comparing her to a chimp. The First Lady to a chimp. This was in another email that the hospitality person in Nashville, Tennessee, sent around to hotel and hospitality people, and meeting planners. But as it turned out, Jack, our good friend, a doctor, a psychiatrist in Baltimore, who happens to be a meeting planner, got the email too. And she called him out because the black psychiatrists are going to have a meeting in Nashville. And it was canceled because of this. So I'm saying this is the larger context for peace or try to have happiness in this environment. Again, we go back to the pyramid again, with the people at the bottom and the money at the top. We rule you, we fool you, we shoot you, we can't read that. We eat you, right? Right. Right. This is the system. Just came out. The top 5 muckers. You know what a mucker is? A mucker is a hedge fund manager. That's the lingo for a hedge fund manager among themselves. They call each other muckers, right? And so the top 5 muckers, and here we have their names, they made in 2009 only, David Tepper made $4 billion in 2009. George Soros, $3.3 billion in 2009. Y'all hear me? This is just 2009, and so forth. And here's their pictures. What did they do to earn that money? Here it is. Today's Wall Street Journal. U.S. charges Goldman Sachs with fraud because they played the game. They sold people these stocks, and then but they didn't tell them that they were also planning on making sure they go short. And so they made money on both ends. That was a gross fraud. So who's happy in that picture? We're not, but that's the larger context. We got to keep that in mind. That's the larger context. So is money worth the price? The banksters. And so we find them fighting over the money. But in the meantime, our communities look like the Sahara. McCoy Tyner. And we find ourselves fighting our angelic side and our so-called evil side. But where does that come from? Let me give you a little clue here. I'm going to show you a little short clip. It's only about 20 seconds or so. Can we see this here?
Yes.
These are 2 fruit flies. 2 male fruit flies. What are they doing? They're fighting to control this turf here, this space. As it turns out, fruit flies are a good model to study aggression. Because because the genes for aggression in fruit flies have been conserved in human beings. Are y'all getting that? Are we seeing where a lot of the shooting that took place the other night, right? 12 hours, 22 shots, 7 dead. This today's paper. Are we getting this? We're making the connections here between aggression of fruit flies, that we have the same genes. A good friend of mine and teacher, a rabbi, Eliyahu Abraham, talks about in Judaism there's the notion of the evil inclination. Not that we're necessarily born evil, but there's an inclination for evil. And that's very important because we can see where it's coming from. That is part of nature. But we're supposed to be able to manage that, control that, repress that inclination. But if people's needs aren't being met, then it becomes very hard to do. Because we have the media, 6 largest media corporations here, Disney, Mickey Mouse and a lot of other things, Time Warner, Vivendi Universal, News Corp, Viacom, Bertelsmann. They are controlling much of what we see, read, and hear. And so we're under the influence. There's the battle for mind share, with our minds being the chalice here, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, that's the prize. And so a study released today analyzed the amount of exposure to television, music, movies, and other media content and children and teenagers. That there's a whole public health dimension to media consumption and happiness. That's the point here. Childhood obesity, tobacco use, sexual behavior, drug use, alcohol, low academic achievement, attention deficit disorder, and so forth. So on March 19th, 2009, 29 children were killed. And this is the artwork that some children at a school in Little Village did. Are we seeing how there's scars on their consciousness, that their capacity for happiness is limited by their larger social context? And this drama is taking place in our communities across the country. So, still thinking about happiness as public policy, the needs to be recognized as a major public health issue rather than as a series of commercial endeavors needing regulation. This is a new movement about making media exposure a public health issue like tobacco and alcohol. That children have the right to the privacy of their own minds. That's something that I contend. But they're being exposed to a lot of stuff. And so they're learning a lot of stuff to feed into that inclination to harm themselves and others. So what might be learned? Love me or I'll hurt you bad. That's stupid. How can you expect anyone to love you under those conditions? But this is what's happening, right? Rihanna, right? Earlier this year, this type of violence is taking place, is being perpetuated and perpetrated by the media against the possibility of having happiness. Because it's not about you or me being happy. It's about making money. That's subjective, about making money for a few. And then not sharing that money. There was an article in this week's Wall Street Journal that talked about the writer on the editorial page asked, why should we share our wealth as a country? I got mine. Why should I be forced by the government to share it? Why should the government have health care for everyone? But most European democracies have health care for their citizens. So we have The Simpsons, like learning aggression. We have Manhunt. We have Super Columbine Massacre. You can download it for free. It's been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times, where you can play the two killers at Columbine High School.
Wow.
Right? And there's Ernie with a gun. Now this is important here. This is a new game called, well, actually 2002, called Ethnic Cleansing. The Race War Has Begun, where a white guy, white supremacist type, is out to kill Latinos and black people to get to the Jews, who in their minds are controlling things. Then you can play at raping women from this game from Japan.
Wow.
Right? And then you've heard of the Left Behind series? Well, now it's become a video game where you can try to speed up the rapture, at least in the game, by offing all the non-believers. So we talk about anger management, Dr. Ingram, right? Ever wonder what's on young girls' mind when they see guys with saggy pants? They find them sexy. Sagger is a new fashion statement. I don't know if this Tommy Hilfiger or somebody got these out now. So now happiness is being directed where?
Fashion.
Right? Not just simply fashion, but statements. Fashion statements that run counter to our human possibility. You have lowriders, slit jeans, panties, and no panties for the girls. We see them in the streets. So Ben Okri, one of my favorite writers, in his book, Songs of Enchantment, he talks about there are corpses in the consciousness of all people, all histories and all individuals. Dead things that need to be acknowledged and buried, dead habits, dead ways of being, seeing, dead ways of living, things that weigh us down and drag us towards death and prevent us from growing, choking out the sunlight. So we have a science of happiness is competing with a science of selfishness. A science of narcissism. A science of meanness. You know, there's a journal of happiness studies. There's many, many books that's coming out. Happiness and Public Policy here. You know, there's all kinds of studies and books, departments and universities. Maybe Malcolm X might have one. Department of Happiness, Happiness Studies. But they're competing with all of this. But they're not being studied really, except by psychiatrists, perhaps. So we find the state of our heart as fractured. So we ask the question, is MAATI relevant today? That was 4,000 years ago. Why do we need to go back to Egypt? Well, I'm not asking anyone to go back to Egypt because Egypt or Kemet is dead. It's dead. It does not exist. The language is not being spoken. The culture is not being practiced. So for all intent and purposes, it's dead. But the ideas are not dead. And that's the most important thing. That those ideas are still within us today, in this room. But they're fragmented. just as that. So the study of MAATI is highly relevant to contemporary ethical issues. Extending the ancient concept of MAATI, we can redevelop tools to more fully explore and critique the complexity of the interrelatedness of contemporary ethical issues in art as well as business, education, ecology, health, politics, religion, and science. We would very likely accrue new insights in resolving conflicts and increasing respect and regard. But we have to contend with the notion, as Thomas Burrell talks about, advertising company founder Burrell, in his new book, Brainwashed, that we're constantly being brainwashed. We're being told that there's something wrong with us, that we don't have any self-worth, self-esteem, or our self-worth or self-esteem depends on what we wear, what we drive, where we live, what job we have, who we're dating, so forth and so on. So happiness is elusive because this is the messages that we're being given day in and day out. And our youth, many of them don't have a clue. Not only do they not know who they are, they don't know their history or traditions. And this whole notion of brainwashing goes down into how our brains work. We won't have time to do that. But as Dr. King talked about, that there are examples from history, the Bakongo here, their notion, Iwa Pele among the Yoruba, Akhenaten, the circle, let the circle not be unbroken. Dr. Fukia talks about Mbongi, an African tradition. This is very powerful. This little book is really powerful. And his other one, Self-Healing. Self-Healing talks about the African ways of healing the community, of bringing forth happiness. Very powerful small books. So we look at MAATI, I've kind of reduced the major themes and things down to 7 cardinal virtues: order, balance, harmony, compassion, reciprocity, justice, and truth. To show that they're all interconnected, they're all related. That from the practice of these things within our lives today, we can generate a gifted environment with deep discernment, lucid leadership, creative collaboration, passionate purpose, shared vision, and agile attention. To focus on really what works, what it is that makes us happy or has the capacity for that. So what was MAATI? Ultimately, it's about one's relationship with reality. And that determines whether or not you're happy. Because happiness is not simply an attitude. All of these things are connected. Our embodied brain, environment, culture, music, dance, language, all these things are constantly interacting, which constitutes reality over time. So what can we do? One of the things is develop the right view of reality and self. Understand the importance of agency, history, and the role the media influences. Withdraw as much as possible from the system. Now that's very hard in this system that we find ourselves. But we have to find creative ways to not participate in the madness. That may mean not watching television for a week. Try it and see how you feel. See the quality of your thoughts from not watching television, because that puts you in a cycle of constant unhappiness, as I showed you earlier. So we have to withdraw from that and go within. We have to practice some form of spiritual discipline. Not just simply going to church, mosque, synagogue, temple. We have to learn how to distill our mind, our thoughts. So that means we have to learn some form of meditation, whether it's mindfulness with an object or without an object, or doing Tai Chi, but you got to do something. So we have to strengthen our own and our children's psychological and moral courage and resilience to do and speak what's right, develop strategies to unlearn disabling and limiting beliefs, misconceptions, assumptions, and dangerous stereotypes, while learning the art of living luminously, generating gifted environments for a continual optimal development of the child, their peers, caregivers, as well as ourselves. That's our charge, to recreate another type of society. Or do we just want to accept what is? That is this the best of the human possibility? Is this it? Can we do better? Don't we want our children to inherit something better than this? Well, then we're the ones who have to bring it into being. Us right here and others. So here's some strategies for healing unhappiness. Be mindful of your unhappiness associated psychological routines and cues, moods, motivation, people, places, words, objects, and outcomes. You got to pay attention to what is it that's making you unhappy. Familiarize yourself with feelings arising prior to or with thoughts associated with unhappiness, and to push past any emotional discomfort. Because sometimes we just are in our comfort zone, even being miserable, right? Because it's comfortable, it's predictable. We know what's coming, more misery. And so we look for the more misery. And you know one thing? We have a reward system within our brains, the dopamine system, that rewards us for being miserable with more misery, because it sets us up for that. Because it doesn't know, just like our brains don't know anything about beliefs, it's just acting on how you experience life and what you value. Even things that aren't good for you will be tagged with, this is good. I want more of this. And it's unconscious. So we have this shadow self, and we have to see behind and beyond reality's shadow world. Or as Sarunj from Kemet, to restore that which is damaged and destroyed, to raise up that which is in ruins, to set right that which is wrong, to replenish that which is lacking, making it better and more beautiful than it was before. So happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony, or Hatmaskani. We have to remind ourselves that we are all connected, that we're not separate here. Everything is part of our consciousness. Everything. The sky, the earth, the people that we come in contact with, they're all part of us. And our ancestors understood this deep interconnectivity. And we have to remember that. We have to be cognizant of the present moment, because the now is all we have, is this present moment. And from that present moment, we can create alternative presents as well as alternative paths. That we can reframe, reinterpret things that happened to us in the past so they don't influence us now in the present, in the right now. That is possible. Just remember this. I just did a workshop a couple of weeks ago, talk about reset, change your story, heal your life. That every 100 to 500 milliseconds, or 1/10 to a half a second, we have the opportunity to change. We have the opportunity to reframe past emotional experiences. Every 100 milliseconds, Because our thoughts are not continuous. They're just like a movie. They're in bits and pieces, which our left brain pulls together, makes a story out of. And we end up living this story. Often a false story, right? But a story nonetheless. But every 100 milliseconds, we have an opportunity to change consciously. We can do that. Say, we can do that.
We can do that.
Absolutely. Because that would constitute a hidden mass community. There's something in physics where they talk about the hidden mass or dark matter, that the universe that we see really is the universe, that there's this dark matter that can't be seen, that's hidden, like Amen in ancient Kemet talked about that which is hidden. Amen, Amen. At the end of your prayer you say, Amen, right? Which is given credence to the notion of that which is hidden. So that there's this dark matter, this hidden mass. And so we're talking about creating this hidden mass, but visible through the Carnet Wellness Institute of people who want to change things. Am I right, President Brooks?
Absolutely.
So we want to return to self, share happiness, generate goodness for yourself and others. And we have to be reminded that this pale blue dot is where we're at, the Earth, from right outside the solar system. Billions and billions and billions of miles away, taken with the Pioneer 10 satellite. That we have to be reminded where we're at. That some of the stuff that we're involved in is really not serving us. It's inconsequential. It's not bringing us happiness. It's not generating genuine joy. It's not helping us get along with other people. A lot of the conflicts that we're having, it really doesn't matter. It's inconsequential. Because the most important thing is the happiness that we generate from within ourselves. That we have that capacity to do that all the time. It's not out there because there is no out there. Out there does not exist. It's all here. It's all part of us. That our consciousness is based on relationships between all that exists. It's not located here. Our brain is the mediator of it. Just like you tune radios to different channels, different frequencies, we can tune ourselves to different frequencies or vibrations of existence. And our ancestors did that. They had rituals for doing that. They had ceremonies for doing that. But we don't have those type of ceremonies anymore. The church folks forgot about them. They did. You know, if you're not a Sufi Muslim, you know, you're not participating in those type of rituals that can change the consciousness of people, to liberate them. And it's no offense, but it's just true. You know, how will the Catholic Church survive? It will survive given the problems that it's having today. But those problems were created. And so to close out with a text from Kemet, may the sky be at peace, may the earth be in joy, may the air be clean and fresh, may the waters be pure, may every man and woman everywhere walk in beauty. And more of this will be found in my upcoming book called the MAATI Code. Thank you.
Going to have any questions that you have, and I've got to remind you all that, remember now, Karnak is a place where we come to interact and to discuss these problems. Dr. Ingram, Professor Hunter, Dr. Edith Young, Sister Buchanan, Dr. Terry Mason, all of these people have knowledge, expertise. But it's us, it's all of us, who will make the changes that have to take place, including them. They just come to share some part of their knowledge, their expertise, their wisdom. So Karnak is an interactive session. It's where we come and we bring our water and our tea and our juice. Then we sit and discuss these solutions and these concepts that these people have brought for us to consider on how we can live our life and how we can change our community. So let's have some fun, let's ask some questions, but let's come up with our own interpretations of what do we do next. What do we do next? We've had 5 of these sessions now, and they just keep getting better and better and better because they keep building. They keep building on this foundation that we're getting, one after the other. It's almost genius how Dr. Ingram has set these up, how each person coming behind each other and builds on the other. So let's have some sincere dialogue and interaction. What are we going to do? Because each week we should see a change in ourselves and a change in our families and those people that we come in contact with. You got a mic here that's working? Okay, Boomy, good, it's working. Anybody, let's get up. Let's talk. We got it. We got some serious work. Could you put that newspaper up again? Professor Hunter? That's just phenomenal. I hadn't seen that. Okay, 12 hours, 22 people been shot. 22. 22 shot and 7 are dead. In 12 hours. I mean, that's just phenomenal.
It's not Baghdad, but
It's not Baghdad? It's worse than Baghdad. You got Dr. Porter's here. We're going to bring her into contact, Dr. Ingram. Psychologist, works with battered women a great deal. Thank you for coming. Okay? Come on, folks. We got to do something. And it's going to be us because we're the only ones who are enlightened enough to do something. Right? Because the other people would have solved the problem if they could. Mayor Daley, the senators and the congressmen, they would have done something, wouldn't they? If they could have, they don't have the consciousness we got. Maybe they need to be here. That's the point, to raise their consciousness. Come on, we got business to do, and all of us are powerful to do it. All of us are powerful to do it. Come on, sister, let's go.
Dear Brother Hunter, thank you so much. How do we get from this place where we are today? I know the work that you're doing, but how do we get from the discussion phase, which is very, very important, to the place where we're putting what you're talking about into practice so more people can begin to, I'm going to use the word heal, and begin to help other people to heal in the community? How do we get to the actualization phase?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things that we need to do, at least the people in this room, we shouldn't leave without introducing ourselves to each other. I think that's very important, that we have a captive audience, so to speak, here, of well-meaning, well-intentioned people with the right mind, right heart. You don't have to go outside of this space. They're already here. So I would suggest that you talk with other people, even someone you don't know, and just say, hi, how are you doing? You know, what did you think about this lecture? You know, what are you doing? What's happening in your community? You know, how we may collaborate on something. So I think that would be a start. Beyond that, I think we have to get involved. You know, one thing that I would suggest that while he's still senator is to call up Senator Burris and ask him, Senator Burris, in 1793, Benjamin Banneker and Benjamin Rush propose a United States Department of Peace? You know, can you introduce such legislation, for example? That's one thing that we can do. Now, the Pentagon has what they call the black budget, the hidden budget, of around $50 billion. Can we take money from different agencies and create this new Department of Peace? Yes, it expands the government, but I think you need to have a balance between a Department of Defense, of Homeland Security, and a Department of Peace. Maybe such a Department of Peace can be a super department like Homeland Security, where health, education, and welfare would be under that. Everything pertaining to well-being or long-term happiness could be in such a department. So I think that, you know, those of us here in Illinois and elsewhere viewing online should write their senators and their congressmen, email them, and ask them, because I think there are a couple of people who are working on this. I don't have their names with me now, but I can get that. So that's another thing that we can do. Yes.
Brother Hunter, that was powerful. I just want to thank you again for putting all of that together. I had a question about, well, maybe a comment. Actually, in our communities, when we work with young folks, we always talk about what are we going to do with them, and we have to. I would ask, do you agree? I think it's time to re-language and understand that we have and focus on our epicenter of the people that we come from, the Kemetic people that we come from, instead of the epicenter that has been created of our pain. So maybe you could address that.
Well, the pain part still continues. That's why, you know, one of the things that, and this is really difficult, particularly when you go to other countries and you talk with African descended people, say in Latin America, there's still a lot of pain and shame associated with slavery, with the notion that my worth is a continuation of this horrific experience in the past. And so that determines who I can be, what I am today. But I think one of the things we need to do, we have to have a conversation about what really happened. We haven't had a conversation of what really happened then and through the generations up to this point. Why is that important? I'll give you one example. A couple of years ago, I went to Columbia myself and gave a number of lectures to community organizations and at a school, elementary school. And I said that, and I've done this other places, that we were never slaves. And they looked at me just like you're looking at me now. Really strange. President Brooks, how can you make such a statement? Oh, we were enslaved. I said, no, we were not slaves, the noun, or enslaved. That never happened to us. First off, we have to do a little etymology, sister, and look at where does the word slave come from, right? Well, we know it comes from Eastern European peoples known as Slavs, collectively. And unfortunately for them, they came out on the losing side of a number of wars, where other Europeans, more Western Europeans, had them under their control because they were the losers. And so as being under their control, the word Slav became synonymous with slave. But there were no Slavic peoples who were slaves when the Bible was written. They didn't exist. And in Hebrew, the word that's been translated as slave, abid, simply means work. To work, or work for someone, or work for the Lord. It didn't mean the type of chattel slavery that we associated with it today. So we have to do some history lessons. We got to go back and see that when the Bible was translated, they inserted the word Slav for the word for work to control, theologically, the Slavic people. And so they've been stuck with that for several hundred years. And that's why there's no more Yugoslavia. There's no more Czechoslovakia. There's the Czech Republic. I talked with the consulate of the Czech Republic a few years ago. I have one of our friends here was in the audience when we were there over at Spertus Institute at one of their affairs for a conference. And I asked him, and he told me that's why they changed the name, because they were tired of being associated with Slav being slave, which it's not the case. Our experience would more or less come under the United Nations term ethnocide, which is not necessarily also cultural genocide. It's not genocide per se, where the goal is to kill people. In this way, the goal is to dehumanize people, a population. But I don't want to go too far off of that. But we haven't had that kind of discussion to really get to the root of where this unhappiness keeps perpetuating itself, generation after generation after generation. So one of the things that I do in my workshops is I ask everyone to stand. And so this is a lecture, so I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. Thank you. And just repeat after me. I am a worthwhile, worthy, and wonderful human being. Now, how do you feel? Right? How does it make you feel saying that? To tell yourself that every day. To look in the mirror and honor yourself by saying, I'm a worthwhile, worthy, and wonderful human being. You can sit back down. Because remember this. Keep this in mind. There were 300 to 500 million sperm, right? And there was one egg. And somehow the intelligence of that one egg, Tawana, chose one sperm that became you and you and you. So think about those odds. 1 to 300 million of your existence. So you have intrinsic worth. You have the capacity for intrinsic happiness. If you see yourself as worthy of that. And that's something that we have to work on. Yes.
I infinitely agree with what you just said. That is great. That is great. Because I also want to add to that. I've been doing a lot of reading, and then do I have a couple minutes? I want to say something.
No, it's got to be short.
No, it's going to be super short. We're
They're
actually
getting
ending
ready
in about
to
1
shut
minute.
it down.
1 minute. Okay, I'm gonna make it real brief. I just want to go into the Bible. Just a couple words that I've noticed in the Bible, and I read a lot of different texts and a lot of different works, but I just want to specifically deal with the things that were said in the Bible, if we can do that. Just so I can have a clear understanding of what I'm saying as well. Because as I'm telling these things, I'm also learning as well. Like it said in the Bible, it said when Moses went to the mountain, he went to the mountain and the bush was on fire, and he was speaking to God, and God said to him, go tell the pharaohs to let my people go. And then Moses said, well, who should I tell sent me? He said, tell them I am sent you. I am that I am sent you to tell them to let my people go. So that word to me synonymously means, I am means God, right? So the word I am to me means God. So then, now if I fast forward to the book of Genesis, where it says, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with him. So then the word to me means that you have power in your word. So that means that your word, the word that you speak out of your mouth has power. Because if you have the power your words have power. And it says, in the beginning, let there be light, and And so there were, so that means that the word was spoken and there was power in the word. Then if I fast forward to where it says there's nothing in infinite spirit that ain't in you, and there's nothing in you that ain't in spirit, which means that we are made in the image of God, and the image of God is in us. So that means that the word that you speak has power, and you are of God descendant, and you are of infinite intelligence. So that means that the same word that you speak has power. So then when you use the word I am, that means that the words that you use in your I am has the same power. So then when you say I am sick, you're saying the power in me is sick. So when you say I am sick, you're saying the God in me is sick. When you say I am well, then you say I am well. You're saying the God in me is well. So then when you say that I am poor, then you're literally saying the God in me is going to do the things in me that's going to make me poor. So you have to be mindful of the words you use, because the words you use has the synonymous power to give you that which you wish. Because infinite mind, as we say, consciousness expands, because we're living a life of consciousness which expands. So if we are a God consciousness, and we belong to a God consciousness which expands, and everything we do, whether good or bad, expands. Good or bad, it expands. So if you expand on badness, then it will expand. If you expand on goodness, then it will expand. So if you say, I am rich, as
Before they get to the next question.
oh, okay, I didn't see him back there.
But I appreciate your comment.
You know, I just went on and on, but I just wanted to let you know that I understood some things as I was looking at that, and then it just brought me back to some consciousness of expanding. And thank you for allowing me the microphone, but usually when I get the microphone in my hand, I just go nuts.
Well, we see that.
Give me.
Hold up, Professor Hunter, please respond to the brother here.
Well, you know, I'll have to give a neuroscience argument, and well, there is power in our words, in our speech, in our thoughts. So I'll just leave it as that, because I want to get to this question here.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My question is, and it's not that I'm insulting anyone here. However, what often happens is that knowledgeable African Americans and intelligent people, we give a diagnosis, you know, amongst ourselves of what we should do and how we should, the methods that we should implant inside of our community. And I mean, we have all of these methods and strategies and the way we should, you know, assist these, take care of these problems. However, there are less actions and more verbal, you know what I'm saying, communication. You know, also, my question is, I believe, not a question, rather a statement, I believe the issues that we have and the answers to them usually begins with the leaders, you know, begin with the men. You know, I'm just going to pinpoint it. Who are the ones acting up the most in our community? The young men. You know, the young ladies are acting up because usually the young men are. And we're still leading them in a direction where they would go. And that's just honestly how life is. So just getting down to the meat of things, I think we should do a lot less talking and more or less more actions, you know, more going to the communities, more love, corrections, and critiquing, and embracing people and acknowledging them and the difficulties that come along with life, you know, and not just pulling out a book and saying, read this. You know, we should be that book. You know what I'm saying? Plainly, the Word of God says we outlive in epistles.
All right.
You know what I'm saying?
Amen.
So we honestly, we have to literally just continue to walk. You know, not necessarily when I say walk synonymously, I mean actions. We have to go out here. We got to talk to these people, and it is difficult. You know, a lot of these young men and women don't want to listen, but that doesn't stop us from being who we are. You know, a rose can't stop being a rose just because someone has stepped on them. So that's more or less, you know, my statement / question, and that's really what it comes down to. Okay. Can I say one very, very small thing?
Quickly.
Okay, and no problem. And honestly, I think we speak too much in broad and general terms. You know, we need to get to the root of issues. You know what I'm saying? This is an issue, let's deal with it precisely so we can move on to the next thing, as opposed to just giving a general diagnosis. That's it.
Great.
gonna make this short because I know y'all ready to wrap this up. Alonzo. And my question is that, well, first, I'm pretty much a person into politics, religion, world affairs, current events, history, that sort of thing. And my question is like, well, you know, like in the 40s, we had a president by the name of Roosevelt who said, if something happened in politics, you better believe it was planned to happen that way. So when you got the stuff that's happening today that's crazy and lunacy, it may seem crazy and lunacy to us, but really it's some type of plan, like some type of cause that brought that effect, like it was planned, you know, problem, reaction, and then they give you the solution. So with all the stuff that's happening around us that's allegedly planned, how do you break free from that when, you know, you got news and the news and stuff that's already pre-filtered before we even receive it on the television and, you know, radio and so forth? How do we break free from that? And then overall, how do we get that to the younger generation? Because a lot of the youngsters, they're pretty much into the hip-hop music, the Lil Waynes, the Gucci Manes and stuff like that. It's like, how do you get truth into their ears when they so blindsided?
That's a very good question, and it's a challenge for sure. But I think one of the things we need to do in that regard is, I gave you a suggestion earlier on what can we do. I don't know if you remember that particular slide.
I probably stepped out because I got
Right.
solo.
Okay. Well, on that particular slide, I said one of the things we need to do is withdraw. That when we give all our energy to all of this, you have very little energy or time to work on yourself. So we have to step out of this. You know, this really is the matrix in more ways than one. A lot of people really don't know how prescient those films were and how descriptive they were in describing conditions within the world then and today. That we have to step out of this. We have to not give it so much of our attention and time. You know, we have to start corralling other people of like-minded, like hearts to do the same thing. You know, you can't, you know, the stuff is profoundly complex and interrelated. All this stuff is interrelated. You know, I can feel what you're saying. That if you don't have leaders, seers and sages, not just simply leaders, I'm talking about seers and sages, a community of them, to bring forth a sagacious society with people who have mastered themselves and offering their wisdom to the community, because that's their purpose. On the continent, there were certain societies that did art for therapy, for everyone, for the community. That's all they did, was create art. That was the whole purpose, for wholeness, for cohesion. But in this society, unfortunately, art isn't for that. Art is for entertainment. Art is for making money. Art is for egoic activities. Art can be narcissistic. Art can be walking down the street where President John F. Kennedy was shot, and you strip yourself and be shot, right, and fall down nude. But that's art. At least some call it art. But how does that change the consciousness of the youth who are watching it? We become voyeurs in the problems that the artists have. As many artists do drugs, that consciousness comes forth through their music, through their songs, through their lyrics. And just go to YouTube. You can see all the videos. There's thousands of them. Some of them really are off, are whack. You know, really, really. You know, there's one, I won't play it here. I do have it, I did download it for folks to see. You know, where a young woman, 20-something, is celebrating the virtues of being a prostitute to the music. That the sex was spectacular. And so our daughters will find that via their friends. You know, we may try to protect them, but, you know, we can't be around them 24/7. And they'll see that. They're corrupting them. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen young women who are college students trying out to be a dancer in a white boy video. But they didn't tell them when they're trying out, well, you know, we're going to cut 2 versions of this. We're going to cut the saved version, and then we got the censored version and the uncensored version. Right? So, do you still want to do this video? Because you got to do both versions. And the uncensored version calls for you to undress and present yourself in very unflattering, unforgivable poses if you want to make this money. And the young women, they wanted to do it. Because it's about the money, not about the education, but it's the consciousness that's constantly corrupting. Because there's so much money to be made. You're wondering what's going to be next. They keep raising the bar. People think about reality TV. It's not reality, it's constructed. I'm sorry, but the Desperate Housewives of Atlanta is edited and got a script, which they ad-lib on.
Behind the scenes is worse.
Right. You know, I mean, that's just the reality. So you got to withdraw from this. You got to tell your children and others in the community, withdraw from this. You got to challenge, if you go to church, challenge the minister to preach on Sunday about withdrawing from this. Not celebrating it. You know, we just passed Lent. Did anyone say, I want my congregation to fast 40 days with no TV, no entertainment whatsoever? Yeah, he might not have a church after that. But that's serious. But it's hard to do. Because, you know, it's dealing with our consciousness. And our brains don't care. Really, it's neutral. It doesn't care. In terms of the inner experiences that we're having, it doesn't care. It just puts tags, things that you feel brought you pleasure or happiness. And happiness is not pleasure. Happiness is not salvation. Salvation is in the distant future after death. You can't imagine what happiness is like after death because that's an entirely different experience. You can't imagine happiness while dying. That's not possible. So that's different from salvation. We have to be clear on that. Any other thoughts? Because we're...
Professor A.Adams, you answered my question. Thank you. We never want to run from Carnot, but we do respect everyone's time. So we do have a cutoff point, and we'll stop the formal lecture. But if anybody wants to stay, we can stay and talk with each other as long as we need. Carnot is always open. Professor Adams, one of the young ladies asked for one of the slides. It was that she needs to see and take some notes on. What slide was it again, my sister?
4 points of happiness.
The 4 points of happiness. Can you pull that slide back up?
Sure.
Do we all have a better understanding? When I said he answered my question, so I'm not looking for anybody to give me my happiness. Okay? Happiness is my reality.
That's right.
My reality. So I will make it myself. right? So I'm very happy right now. I'm around all of you. I'm very happy right now. Thank you for answering my question, brother.
President Brooks,
Yes, sir.
can I mention to you all that we've created a website to contain all of this knowledge and all of this information. And you know, you don't grow a tree overnight. You have to plant a seed and water it and water it and water it. And that's the way I see what we're doing is we're watering this seed. And the only way to accomplish that is if we come back and we come back and we work on it and we work on it and we study and we study. And I believe that, you know, we are the higher level minds. You know, everybody in the community is not in here, but it'll take us to take this knowledge out to the community and talk to people and talk to those that we have influence over. I know every one of us has influence at least over one or two people. So if you want to do something, bring them next week. This is an ongoing process. It's not going to end. It's going to continue through the summer and on and on and on until we figure this thing out. And in the meantime, we are collecting all this knowledge, these videos, the PowerPoints that you can review and study, because this is a lot of material. You can't get it all at one time. But on your off time, when you turn that TV off, maybe you can switch to your computer and go back and revisit the lecture. Revisit Dr. Ingram's lecture and study, and then tell people to go watch it. I've told people to go watch it, and they were like, wow, I want to become a member of Karnak. And so let me say that our website does have a registration process. So while you all are there, if you take time to register, it just takes a few mouse clicks, you will be registered, and then we can send you information. You can even post information yourself if you have some knowledge that you'd like to share with us. In addition to that, we sure would like to welcome you all to make suggestions on powerful speakers and powerful presenters that might want to help us with this effort. Thank you very much, President.
No, thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't say the website.
Right.
It is the name of this organization, Karnak Wellness Institute.com. KarnakWellnessInstitute.com. It should be printed on some of the literature that you have. Thank you all very much.
I do have some DVDs for sale if one is interested.
Okay,
One is on my eyes.
Excellent, thank you. Lonzo said a lot of good stuff there, and one of the most important things he said is that our speakers on Karnak, for Karnak, we want more speakers because, Hunter hit it again, we just keep hitting it, that there's wisdom out here. There's sages, there's people who have wisdom and knowledge, and they need to share it with us. Because what we get is that newspaper crap, okay? That doesn't do us any good. So if you know anybody in your community who needs to be standing up here and sharing with us, okay, let us know. Let us know who they are, and we'll call them and talk to them and determine if they're worthy to get in front of us, okay, and talk to us about the knowledge and experience they have. Is that the slide that you wanted, my sister?
No, sir, it was, it had basically the information on how to obtain.
All right, let's help us. Give us an idea of where it was in the presentation. You think you know what it is, Hunter? Let me say something about a point the young man made. I love young people, right? Because young people got energy, they got fire, they're ready to go out and change the world, right? We're all conscious here. And something a very important man said that is very important for us to understand. And that is action without thought. Action without thought is empty. Thought without action is blind. So let's make sure we come and keep getting this knowledge. We're not going to do anything. Hunter gave us an example of something that we can do. He gave us an example of something that we can do. We're going to come up with solutions. We're not just coming here every week and sitting and listening. Right? When we leave the doors, what do? We go out, we talk to people, we exemplify what we have learned. We're role models. And as we keep coming back and we get more knowledge and more power, we'll do more things. Right? Because your conscience won't let you not do anything. That's true. Your conscience won't allow that to happen. Right?
So we keep coming back. I'm so optimistic, I don't know what to do.
Professor Adams, is it okay that I post your PowerPoints on the website and then she can access it and review it at her leisure?
No,
No?
not on the website.
Okay. That's why I asked.
Good, that's what, thank you for asking. Okay? My
Well, some of
sister-
the images aren't mine, and so it gets into intellectual property issues. So I can't.
Well, I offer to you to decide what you would like to use. You have a space on the website
Okay.
for you.
Okay.
And I'd like for you to decide yourself what you think is appropriate.
Sure.
And I encourage you to post whatever you think will help all of us.
Okay.
And you did say you had a CD there?
Right, a DVD of a lecture that I did on rediscovering my art. And it's only $15, and there's 2 bonus lectures on here, one by Dr. Wade Nobles and also by Dr. I don't like my name. No, Barbara Sizemore. So you can see me afterwards.
Is that the one? All right, you get it.
Okay.
You get it. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great evening. You have a great weekend.
I'm just going to You still recording? I'm trimming.